vintage vibe. Get ready.
This is not a dream.
Sansui AU-111, the masterpiece. Straight out of the vault, only here on The Vibe. You know, there's a few special pieces that I've hung on to over the years, or I've reacquired, sometimes not once or twice, but in this case, 3 times. Nope, wait a second. 4 times. I really think this is probably one of the best integrated amplifiers ever made by a really special manufacturer that really has fans everywhere. Sansui Electric is one of the pinnacle Japanese manufacturers of golden era hi-fi. We're going to take a peek first at Sansui, talk a little bit about them as a manufacturer and some of the masterpieces they've come up with, including this very special amplifier, the 111. Sansui is one of those manufacturers that's been around for a long time, founded in 1947, Tokyo, Japan, and founded by this snazzy looking guy, Kosako Keuchi. Really, they were to be manufacturers of, well, transformers. During World War II, he was involved in the radio industry, and as the story goes, was unimpressed with the quality of consumer-grade electronics. So he decided to make something better. Like many other great minds that, you know, had created something so truly unique that stood the test of time. You know, kind of like the little Italian guy that was making tractors and kind of said one day to Enzo Ferrari, "Yeah, you making the junk. I'm going to make us something better." And along comes the Lamborghini Miura, automotive art. So in this case, Kosaku created really audio art. In the 50s, he made some of the best mono tube amplifiers. I've owned a couple of them. In fact, one of them powered a beautiful Vitavox C191 corner horn that I had. And I'm kind of now trying to assemble a pair of those, but that's for another day. He also created some fantastic stereo tube amplifiers. Actually, one of the very first, in fact, the first stereo integrated tube amplifier was called the PM2020. Now, I've owned 2 of those. The first one worked and worked very well. It was a EL84 based amplifier. You could probably see one of the very earliest videos on The Vibe if you go way back of a little video of one of those. And I had one that didn't work that I never really got around to putting back together. This AU-111 would have come out, well, in the 60s. And it was the pinnacle of tube amplification for Sansui. Now, in terms of other products, they made turntables, they made speakers, they made some fantastic solid state receivers and amplifiers. Take the 2000A receiver or the 4000 or 5000. They also made some later receivers like the 9090 or the G9000, the G22000. I mean, I've had kind of 1 or 2 of all of these. They had a stereo integrated amplifier that was kind of not too long after their tube amps, called the AU-999. And from that, really a masterpiece, a pinnacle amplifier, the AU-9500. You can get just wrapped up in Sansui. I've even had one of their last, which was called a Vintage Moss B2105. That used matched MOSFETs. It was a gorgeous 90-pound behemoth, the amp that got away. Now I want to show you something unique and special that we'll show on another episode just before we go in a little deeper and take a peek at that 111. Come on with me, I'll just give you a little peek here. This is Sansui's TUX-1. This is really a super integrated AM/FM tuner. And it is an absolute behemoth, weighing over 30 pounds. You can see it beside the Philips power amp here. It's actually probably bigger than the Philips. This is a Kenwood 600T killer. Probably one of the very best, if not the best, tuner that was made during this time period. We'll take a peek at this, another episode on the vintage vibe. This is considered to be really the holy grail of Sansui tube amplifiers. It was designed by Ichiro Oshima and was a masterpiece in technology both then as well as today. And the amazing glow comes from the power tube 6L6GC as well as 12AX7 pre-tubes, making it just as comfortable powering a pair of KLH Model 5s or Yamaha NS1000s. Now, despite this amp being made for a few years, there were different versions, and the way to tell them apart is, believe it or not, the knobs. So in this case, you see a solid aluminum knob or knobs. That's one of the later versions. It's said that the more desirable ones are a two-piece black plastic with aluminum. And believe it or not, those little wheels, that's factory. I mean, this is a utilitarian type piece of equipment. It was meant to do one thing, which was make great music. And for features, we've got our input selectors, a center channel control, which is pointless, tape monitor switches, stereo and mono switches, high and low pass filters, treble and bass for right and left channels, defeat switches, crossover rollover switches, presence switch, speaker on-off, loudness, headphone jacks, a separate balance control, and oh, that volume control. And what about the back end? Well, we've got our series of RCA inputs, pre-outs, as well as a separate gain control, your speaker terminals, and AC jacks. So, just how powerful is it? 40 watts of glorious tube power. And if there is magic anywhere, it's right here in those output transformers. Why do transformers sound different? Well, the iron and the shape of the iron can really affect the ability of the core to hold magnetic flux that really induces current in the secondary. The number of windings on each side affects the voltage transformation from the primary to the secondary. In other words, a small change in the number of windings on each side can have a potentially noticeable effect in overall tone. So generally speaking, the larger the output transformer, the wider the bandwidth that the amplifier can recreate or frequency response. Amplifiers that have heavier iron or bigger output transformers tend to be able to also produce more defined, more controlled bass. Now, I understand that there's some tube amplifiers that are phenomenal sounding that do not have big output transformers, but generally speaking, they kind of go hand in hand. Now, if you happen to find a Sansui 111, a couple things that you need to pay particular attention to in terms of service. One, the capacitors are now going to be over 60 years old. In fact, all the parts are going to be. You really need to have the amplifier looked over by a trained professional unless you are that trained professional. We're talking about lethal voltages inside the tube amp, and you don't want to be poking around in there. Now, I found the best sounding of all my Sansui 111s, and remember I've had 4 of them, was the best restored amplifier. So really consider, giving it a thorough once over and, updating the capacitors and other things inside the amplifier as need be. Now, when it comes to things like tubes, Now this is actually the original tubes are inside these packages, the 6L6s. And these were tubes made by Mesa Boogie, the ones that I put in the amplifier, my last one. And these are actually a match set. When it comes to output tubes, you really need to have matched tubes to be able to have the best performing and functioning amplifier. But the output tubes really are not what makes the difference, let's say, in sound. Probably the biggest difference comes from investing in the preamp tubes. The signal tubes or the preamp tubes can have the largest effect on the sound of any tube amplifier. And I found that a really good set of preamp tubes in my 111 just brought it to life. Now, what can you expect to pay for one of these amplifiers? Today in 2023, the 111 is kind of hovering around $2,500 to $3,500 Canadian. And they're, you know, not the easiest amplifiers to find, but there usually is one or two that comes up on the market once a year locally. So if you're looking for one, you can still find one. What can you expect one to sound like? Well, again, if it has been kind of given its once over, you can really prepare to be blown away. This amplifier, in terms of sound, is not shy. It's big and it's bold, but it's the type of amplifier that you can just, I don't know, listen to for all day long. In fact, you'll probably find yourself listening to it for all day long because it sounds that good. It doesn't sound like a old Scott or an old Sherwood. It doesn't have woolly bass. It's not rolled off. In fact, the amplifier has great resolution, and the mid frequencies are sweet and the high frequencies are extended, and it is fairly refined sounding. One of my friends who actually hates tube amps came to listen to my 111 and was absolutely blown away with how untube amp-like it sounded, meaning to him, it sounded great. But of course it sounds like a tube amp, and I'll say it sounds like probably one of the best, if not the best, vintage integrated tube amp, hands down. But I think what he meant by, you know, him saying, geez, it sounds great, it didn't sound like a tube amp, was that he was expecting kind of this overly romanticized, kind of, you know, overemphasized bottom end, maybe, you know, too kind of euphoric in the mid-range, a little rolled off on the top end without that dynamics that you get with a more modern amplifier. See, the Sansui has a lot of depth to it, and the amplifier can play, you know, any modern type music and really be convincing. It is just a tremendous sounding amplifier, and I think the secret, as we mentioned, was in those overbuilt output transformers, a really well implemented circuit design, as well as a great tube complement. I mean, Sansui really was trying to build something that created the benchmark in the 60s and would maintain that benchmark for years to come. Now, if you happen to find your own Sansui AU-111, you'll likely have it for years to come as well too, because I think you'll like it that much. And on that note, should you have one in your vintage audio collection? Absolutely. If you can find one and you can afford one, go get one. I hope you enjoyed the episode here on the Vintage Vibe. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.